One of the things that I found that was really interesting is that I think as women, we kind of know like it's really common to have a miscarriage. But as we get older, the chances of having a miscarriage increase exponentially.
Welcome to Get Pregnant Naturally, where functional medicine and natural fertility solutions will help you get pregnant and have your baby. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah Clark, and my mission is to inspire, motivate, and empower you. And most of all, I want you to wake up. So with functional medicine, we can discover what causes infertility and eventually reverse the condition. Today, I'm welcoming Lisa Hendrickson-Jack back to the podcast. So definitely check out her episode number 20, where we discuss how diet influences the menstrual cycle. Today, we're digging into getting pregnant naturally over 35 and optimizing the low sperm count. So Lisa Hendrickson-Jack is a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner who teaches women to chart their menstrual cycles for natural birth control, conception, and monitoring overall health. In her new book, The Fifth Vital Sign, Lisa debunks the myth that regular ovulation is only important when you want children by recognizing the menstrual cycle as a vital sign. Drawing heavily from the current scientific literature, Lisa presents an evidence-based approach to fertility awareness and menstrual cycle optimization. She hosts the Fertility Friday podcast, a weekly radio show devoted to helping women connect to their fifth vital sign by uncovering the connection between the menstrual cycle health, fertility, and overall health. Definitely check out her website at fertilityfriday.com. And before we jump into today's show, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this to make sure you never miss an episode.
So we're getting super booked with our functional testing and couples coaching program and have very limited spots available. So there's only 4 spots available for January and February. So if you are looking to have your baby in 2019, please click on the link in the show notes to book your free call. So I'll let you know how the call works. First of all, we support couples worldwide who are struggling with infertility to conceive and have healthy babies. So women like Rita, who gave birth to her beautiful daughter after following my fertility coaching system, or Danielle, who after 2 failed IUIs was able to get pregnant after a free call with me. So here's how to get my help for free. So I offer a free Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery Call. And on that call, I'll create a plan with you that is going to help you fast track your success. So this call is not for everyone, and I'm really picky about who I speak with, and I have a strict but totally reasonable criteria that needs to be met in order for us to move forward. So here's who I can help. You need to be able to explore your infertility diagnosis in a new light. This offers for people who are open-minded and coachable. If you can do that, and you want to double or triple your chances at the fertility clinic or get pregnant naturally, awesome. So let's get on the phone and chat. You must be an action taker, so someone who is committed to seeing results when you're able to follow directions. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to do anything bizarre. If you're one of those people and you like to consume a ton of information, but you don't like to spend time implementing and seeing results, then this isn't for you. I only want to spend time with people who are genuinely committed to their own success. So just click on the link in the show notes and apply, or go to fabfertile.com and click on the free consult. It's a really short application that just tells me about your health, how long you've been trying to conceive, and how soon you'd like to be pregnant. So this seriously will be the best time you've ever spent on your fertility. Looking forward to chatting.
Hey, Lisa, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah.
Yeah, excited to dig into this topic today. So yeah, if you can actually check out Lisa, she was on episode number 20, so you can hear more about her journey there. But maybe catch us up to date. I think you've been working on a book.
Yeah, I've been super busy. I mean, the project took 2 years. So I always say, like, I thought it was going to take me 6 months. Yep. I was kind of cocky, but you've written a book. It's a humbling experience.
That's right.
But I'm really, really excited that it's finally done and out in the world. And the book is called The Fifth Vital Sign, Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. And I just really wanted to put out, kind of shift the conversation around the menstrual cycle, the importance of regular ovulation. Just, Sarah, the way that we're taught in our current culture about the menstrual cycle is that it only matters when you want to have children. And outside of that short window of time when you want to have babies, that it doesn't even matter. But it's really, regular ovulation is essential for health, for women. Mm-hmm. And then there's so much you can learn about your menstrual cycle and how it reflects your overall health. And so really just trying to get the word out about the menstrual cycle. And of course, I spend quite a bit of time talking about the fertility awareness method so that you can really learn to understand and interpret your fertile signs and figure out when in your cycle you can actually get pregnant.
I love it. Yeah. Awesome. So, and we'll talk about at the end of the podcast how you can get a free chapter of Lisa's new book. So that's exciting. Yeah. So today we're going to dig into some strategies to help. So if you're over 35 and they call it advanced maternal age, which to me 35 is obviously still young, but in reproductive language, sort of advanced maternal age. So we're going to talk about some strategies here that can help with for women and also for men if you have low sperm count. So let's start with egg health and what are some things that we can do there?
Well, I just want to ask you, Sarah, because there's a lot of information out there about advanced maternal age, and there's some information that would say that we should really be concerned as we get to age 35 and older about our fertility. And then there's a lot of other sources, especially recently cropping up, that are kind of saying like, it doesn't matter, age doesn't matter. And I wouldn't mind just taking a moment to kind of talk about why the age plays such an important role.
Yeah.
And I think as young women, because we grow up with this idea that we can get pregnant every day and all the time, then we spend most of our lives trying to prevent pregnancy actively. And of course, then we assume that, once we're ready and everything lines up and we come off the birth control, that pregnancy is going to happen right away. And so, every woman is different. So, we all know that some women are able to conceive well, into their late 30s and 40s with no problems, but other women have more of a difficult time. And, when I was looking into the research, there's a lot of different reasons why fertility changes as we get older. One of them is egg quality, as we'll talk about. As we get older, we're exposed to more oxidative stress and damage. And so the research is quite clear that as a woman gets older, her egg quality declines. And that means that she's, less likely to bring a pregnancy to term. And what's interesting about that is that even in the IVF studies, for example, if you were to go ahead and do IVF, the success of the IVF is the biggest factor that's going to determine whether or not that's effective isn't the age of the woman, but the age of the egg. So if a woman is, in her 40s and she does IVF, the chances of her conceiving are very small. But if she were to say use, the egg of a woman who was 20 years old or something like that, the chances are much higher that it will result in a live birth at the end. And so I think that's something just to kind of orient the discussion to really recognize that a big part of it is the quality of the egg. One of the things that I found that was really interesting is that I think as women, we kind of know like it's really common to have a miscarriage. But as we get older, the chances of having a miscarriage increase exponentially. So, the Danish study, I think a lot of people have kind of heard about the study, but they examined the pregnancy outcomes of over 600,000 Danish women, and they kind of categorize these women based on their age. And so overall, 13.5% of all pregnancies ended in fetal loss. So they included, miscarriage, stillbirth, ectopic pregnancy, etc. So, but for women aged 20 to 24, let's say 8.9% ended in miscarriage. As women reach the age of 35, which is what we're talking about now, over 20% of women over 35 experience a miscarriage. But if we look specifically at women over age 40, it was over 50%. And women age 45 and over, it was over 75%. So I feel like that's a really important part to kind of center the discussion, because we often think like, oh, it means like I can't get pregnant if I'm older, or I'll have trouble conceiving. And for many women, it's not necessarily that they have trouble conceiving, but the risk of miscarriage is much higher. So you may have to go through more miscarriages before you actually have a pregnancy that goes to term.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a good point to bring up, definitely.
And so that's like a super long preamble, but you had asked me about ways to improve egg quality.
Yeah, no, I think it's important though that thanks for bringing up that study, because it is, I think women know this, but actually to have some of those stats around miscarriage it's good to hear.
Well, yeah. And sometimes when I'm working with, around the menstrual cycle and just in general, trying to optimize timing of sex based on the menstrual cycle, things like that, especially women who are in their late 30s and 40s, many of them have come to me after having several miscarriages and maybe early miscarriages, and having that information to know that it is more common somehow gives a little bit more of a peace of mind. Like, okay, it doesn't mean I'm broken. It doesn't mean I'm totally abnormal. So, I mean, egg quality, you don't want to kind of put out the idea, though, that there's nothing you can do. And I think that's the biggest thing. Yes, fertility does decline with age. It is a real thing, and we do have to be aware of it. But it doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do. And so, I mean, we can kind of go through some of the lifestyle things and then go through some of the kind of specific evidence-based, supplementation type of things. Mm-hmm. But I think one big one that's really hard for a lot of us is reducing sugar consumption. Mm-hmm. And maybe because part of us, we don't necessarily know how much it can affect it. And there's a couple studies that actually looked at this, where they're actually kind of, they're looking at women who, in this study, I mean, they were looking at women who were eating a lot of kind of highly processed breakfast cereals and, rice and potatoes, so kind of super carb heavy. But the women with the highest kind of total simple carbohydrate intake were up to 78% more likely to experience ovulatory infertility. So just by kind of paying attention to what you're eating and really trying to reduce the refined sugar consumption, even kind of cutting back on like soda and, just eat like the big offenders, that can actually play a really important role just improving egg quality in general and improving the chance of healthy ovulation. Caffeine consumption doesn't help either. And so what's interesting is, like, as I was writing my book, I didn't just want to say the same thing that everyone was saying. I wanted to actually see what the research had to say about it. And, caffeine consumption is associated with a lower chance of conception per cycle, especially when it's higher consumption. So I think some of these simple things, doesn't mean to totally have to give up the coffee, but if you're drinking like 3 or 4 cups a day, caffeine at that level has been shown to decrease the chances of conception. Alcohol consumption, I mean, these are kind of like the basic things I think most women would know. But again, alcohol consumption, one kind of interesting thing that alcohol consumption does is it kind of skyrockets your estrogen levels and therefore kind of imbalancing your menstrual cycle hormones. And so for women who are drinking like 4 drinks or more or something like that, like your estrogen level can increase by over 60%. So I feel like having the idea of like, it's not just this general like, oh, alcohol is bad, but having more of a specific like, oh, wow, like it actually affects my hormones, can kind of drive it home that it can really disrupt that. Yeah, just disrupt that natural hormone balance. Cigarettes, I'm listing the big offenders, reducing your, I feel like I don't have to go into cigarettes. Like I just have to say it and then we don't need to talk about it. But if you're wanting compelling evidence, there are research studies that show again that it does throw off your hormone balance and lower progesterone levels, potentially shortening the luteal phase, which the second half of the cycle, which is really critical when you're wanting to conceive, because that's when, the fertilized egg has to implant into the uterus.
And I'm wondering when they'll start bringing out studies about vaping.
Right? Yeah.
As my 14-year-old son, I'm like, okay, yeah, the studies are not out yet. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and because it could be like the nicotine, right? So we don't really know how that affects it, but definitely the research is clear that smoking, alcohol, caffeine, they do disrupt the menstrual cycle. And if you're charting your cycles, you can actually see that because you can kind of experiment with, charting one cycle where you're doing your normal thing and then taking some of those things out and then charting and seeing what happens with your ovulation, what happens with your luteal phase, all that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, some of the other things, these are just general lifestyle things, looking at your xenoestrogen exposure, kind of looking to any of the household products that you use to clean, chemicals, or anything with a scent, whether that's cleaning products or beauty products or things like that, because those chemicals, they are kind of similar in shape and size to our hormones, and so they can throw off that hormone balance. So those are just some of the general lifestyle things. I kind of wanted to zone in on what I was able to find research on so that it's not just general. And did you want me to go into some of the kind of moving into more specific nutrients and how to actually improve some of those factors?
Sure, let's do that. Yeah, and just to recap, so sugar, and we also look at sugar because a lot of times it's made with sugar beets, which are like highly GMO. Kind of. So what is it there? Is it the actual sugar or the fact that we're in the middle of a huge food experiment? And is that then linked, to the glyphosate that's sprayed on the sugar beets, which then we're ingesting the sugar? Is that what's causing it? So it's the chicken and the egg thing. But yeah, interesting. You have the study there to back that up. And I have similar studies in my book as well. It's like, So sugar, caffeine, we always say make sure you don't go cold turkey, because even if you're having 1 cup a day, you could have withdrawal symptoms. So we do like a half decaf and then move it down to like a green tea, and then eventually to a herbal tea. Alcohol is interesting, right? Because it's a lot of times we know on alcohol that we shouldn't, that probably, drinking is, not the best idea for conception, and how it increases estrogen. But, in our society and stuff like that, it is kind of, it is accepted actually. And I'm probably having someone on the podcast actually to talk about, well, not probably, I am having someone on the podcast, and she has a book called Sober Curious, and actually being able to go out there in the world, navigate it into these social circles and not have alcohol at all. And why do we feel as a culture that we need it? And it's sort of saying, hey, I'm not that I'm an alcoholic, but like I'm decided just to not need alcohol at these different things, and to actually, because we sometimes use it as a crutch if we're feeling anxious, or I don't know. So I think that's kind of an interesting conversation. And then also you can say, well, maybe you just want to have alcohol you want to cut it in half, or if you are at an event, maybe just have one, make sure it's organic. Yeah. So just kind of interesting on some of those points. And definitely with the xenoestrogens, especially if you have the MTHFR gene, you want to, limit your environmental toxins. So that's a huge topic to be able to switch that stuff out. So let's dig into the nutrients and things like that and see what you have there.
Okay, sounds good. I thought of something else to kind of add to what you were saying, sorry. It's one thing if your cycles are completely fine and you have no concerns, or, I think it's for this, just to kind of put all of what we're talking about into context, if you're actively trying to conceive and it hasn't been happening as quickly as you would like it to, I feel like at that point it's worthwhile to kind of look into these things. It doesn't mean like never in your life will you ever have any of these things again, right? But just to kind of think about at this particular period of time, are you willing to kind of look at those things for a period of time while you try to optimize your cycles and your egg quality and your health overall, things like that.
Absolutely.
So going into some of the nutrients. So, I think a lot of women who are trying to conceive have already heard about the impact of coenzyme Q10. And so that nutrient has been studied specifically for its antioxidant properties, showing that it does protect the body's tissues from the aging process. And it has been associated with an improvement in ovarian reserve parameters by basically addressing the oxidative stress. A lot of the nutrients that I'm talking about are essentially doing that. It's addressing that issue with aging and the damage caused to those cells by exposure to oxygen. That's what we talk about when we say like oxidative stress or oxidative damage. And so the research suggests that coenzyme Q10 improves birth outcomes and therefore also improves egg quality. Omega-3 fatty acids, so specifically what is found in fatty fish, are also associated with improved egg quality, improved embryo morphology, and improved birth outcomes. So more specifically, higher pregnancy rates and live birth rates, and that's ultimately what you want. And so it's interesting. To get omega-3 fatty acids, it doesn't necessarily have to be in supplement form. You can eat fatty fish a couple times a week, but you could certainly consider some sort of fish oil supplement, cod liver oil supplement. If you're into sushi, I think fish eggs have like the highest density omega-3 concentration. So something to think about anyways. Vitamin A is crucial for reproduction in general, and so both female and male reproduction. It's interesting because animal studies, we can make some connections and get a general sense of how things function. So, but animal studies aren't perfect. So I'm thinking of some rat studies I was looking at were obviously not rats. But if you want to make a female rat infertile, you would give it a diet that is devoid of vitamin A. And I mean retinol, so the vitamin A that we would get from animal foods. So different to the beta carotene, the precursor to vitamin A that we would get from, like, say, carrots or kale or something like that. And so what the research shows, like what we can gather from animal studies, is that without sufficient vitamin A, if the animals aren't provided enough vitamin A, they can't carry the pregnancy to term. So they'll say they reabsorbed it, meaning that they basically miscarried or weren't able to take it to term. Vitamin A is required to initiate the cell division process that allows you to release a healthy and mature egg when you ovulate. And just as a kind of random aside, dairy farmers, there's like a common practice of dairy farmers to actually give vitamin A injections to their heifers, the female cows, and even to the male cows as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, for sperm quality, to improve the quality of the eggs or improve the amount of eggs that they yield, during ovulation. So just something to think about. And vitamin A food sources, liver, cod liver oil are typically the highest sources, as well as, say, eggs and other, it's a fat soluble vitamin, so other kind of animal fat sources.
Yeah, I decided it was a great idea a couple of weeks ago. I thought, I should try liver again. I haven't had that in a while. I'm going to bring in back some organ meats. This is great. So I said to my husband, okay, so he's like, I'll prepare it up. We had to do it with organic liver and with bacon and onions. I'm like, it smells kind of okay. I went and had it. I'm like, damn, I forgot how horrible that was. I literally could not eat it. I thought, well, maybe if it was like put into a pate, but I just, and like, it should have been good, but I think maybe the presentation, he literally flapped that sucker on a plate and just had the onions and the bacon. And I'm like, oh my God. And I was really also very excited about eating this, but it just brought me back to those really young days where maybe I was forced to eat it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, first of all, if you didn't grow up eating liver, don't fry it up and put it on your plate. That's not the way to do it.
No.
Because it doesn't taste the same as steak. So you're going to not want to eat it. Just to put it out there, right?
Yeah.
Liver pate is a great way to eat it. It's incredible how adding some butter and grinding something up can make a big difference. But liver pate is a much gentler way of consuming it. And then also, if you're feeling like you do want to incorporate it, but really are not into the taste, you could consider incorporating liver into ground meat dishes. So if you like to make shepherd's pie or some sort of even meatloaf or something like that, what I always suggest is don't think that you're going to put in 50% liver ever, because it's not going to work out. And that
definitely not 100%.
Definitely not 100%. Really consider adding a 1/6 liver, or even less, just a little bit, because liver is a high density nutrition, and a little bit goes a long way. So, ease into it if you're thinking about adding it. And this goes for you too, Sarah. So in addition to, coenzyme Q10, omega-3s, vitamin A, retinol, vitamin D is essential for optimizing egg quality as well. And so women with adequate levels of vitamin D are more likely to conceive and carry a pregnancy to term. And when they test women who are experiencing fertility challenges, they're much more likely to be deficient in vitamin D.
Yeah, and we see this regularly. I think the functional range for vitamin D is 60 to 80. And we did a podcast with Dr. Will Cole. You can check that out on the link there on the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast. But we typically see them around 20 or 30 as an average of, and then
wow.
And the functional range is tighter than the conventional range, which could be said, okay, it's low normal, but no, that's not the case. You want to have it. You want to then supplement and work with your physician to monitor that over a number of months.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it starts with getting a test so that you know where you stand. And and depending on where you live as well. So, Sarah and I, we live not in the exact same place, but we live in the same province here in Canada, and
it's cold.
It's cold, and I wouldn't say it's dark, but we're definitely really high up.
Yes.
And I'm a dark skinned person, so that's even worse because I need even longer out in the sun to get my D. So especially if you live kind of high up, way past, not close to the equator, it's really important, especially if you're having any difficulties conceiving. So additional nutrients, vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium, folate, zinc, that's kind of like rapid fire. But these, again, are certain antioxidants that have been shown to reduce oxidative damage and therefore, improve egg quality. So, and these are things, certainly you can get a lot of these from your diet and things like that. It's just kind of helpful to think about what you can incorporate, and if you do need supplementation, working with someone that can kind of develop a specific protocol with you is really helpful.
Great.
And then I did list royal jelly in the book.
Oh, yes.
Although, there's the research, we don't really have a ton of research there, but the thought behind it is that, this magical royal jelly is what the bees make to keep the queen bee alive significantly longer than most other bees. And also she's producing eggs. So there's, I think that there needs to be more evidence there, but there is some kind of evidence, anecdotal evidence to show that it can improve egg quality. So worth adding to the list anyways.
Yeah, and if you have any allergies to bees, you don't want to do that one, or
No.
the bee pollen, which I discovered with my wonderful husband, who I basically said, "Oh, let's put the bee pollen in your smoothie. This is so fabulous, great for immune system." He left for work, came back crawling in the door. His whole entire upper body was like he'd been slapped with hives. And I'm like, oh my God, I've almost killed my husband. But
Oh no.
I got him a Benadryl. And then realized that, oh yes, when he was little, he was stung multiple times as he sat on a log when he was like 5 or 6 by bees. And yeah, that was a bad idea. So if you have any kind of issues with bees, don't do that or give it to your husband.
I feel so bad for him.
I know.
So
I was
young
like,
to
oh
be
my God.
traumatized.
Okay, so anything else for egg health?
I think that's a lot of homework, right? That's a lot to start with.
Awesome. Yeah, and then so as we dig into this uterine health, what are some things we can do there to help with the lining and things like that?
I mean, it's a great question to think of what we can do to support uterine health. I think when I'm talking to my clients just in general, I always start with the basics to kind of understand how that uterine lining forms. And it all starts really with the hormone cycle. And so like when you have the first of all, to kind of start at the very basic, the first day of your period is the first day of your menstrual cycle. And that would be the first day when you're actually having that characteristic flow. So I know some women may experience some spotting and things like that before their period comes on, but really day one is the first day where you have this flow. You kind of know if, any woman who's had a period kind of knows when you have that flow, that's when it starts. And so what's basically happening from the perspective of your endometrial lining is that lining is shedding. You're kind of starting from scratch. And at the very beginning of your cycle, that's when your follicles start developing in your ovaries. That's when you're starting to produce more and more estrogen. And the role of estrogen in the menstrual cycle as it relates to your uterine lining is that estrogen causes the lining to grow and proliferate. Estrogen is associated with cell proliferation. That's why, we hear it associated with cancer. Estrogen, it's not that estrogen is a bad hormone, it's just that that's basically one of the primary roles in this case is to cause that growth and development. And so if you think about it from that perspective, then in order for your uterine lining to be healthy and normal and robust, you do have to have sufficient hormone levels. And so, your estrogen levels continue to rise as you approach ovulation. And once you ovulate, it's actually your estrogen that kind of sends that feedback message back to your brain. Your pituitary then releases luteinizing hormone, and that causes you to ovulate. So just as that side note, I know we've talked about ovulation predictor kits before, Sarah, and so they're testing for that surge of luteinizing hormone. But once you ovulate, then your ovaries produce a pretty significant surge of progesterone, then that kind of continues for the rest of your cycle. And as that relates to your endometrial lining, progesterone has a different role. So estrogen and progesterone work together to fully develop the uterine lining. Progesterone, whereas estrogen causes it to grow and to proliferate, progesterone is what really causes those cells to mature. It directs those cells and really prepares the uterine lining to be receptive to a fertilized egg. And again, if your progesterone production is optimal, then what you're going to end up with is a thick and juicy uterine lining. And in many ways, when you have your period, you're essentially kind of getting a printout of how your body did in making that lining at the end of the month. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot is like, what does a healthy period look like, and how much bleeding are you supposed to have, and how could that relate to your endometrial lining? And so a healthy period in terms of the amount of bleeding ranges anywhere from, say, 25 milliliters on the low end to 80 milliliters on the high end. They cap it at 80 milliliters because typically if you bleed more than that, then you are more likely to have like an iron deficiency issue or something like that. And, for the American listeners, that amounts to something like 1 to 3 or 4 ounces, something like that, over the course of your cycle. And so for women who potentially have like a super thin lining and have really, really light periods, so meaning like if you use a menstrual cup throughout your whole period, maybe you're not even filling a whole cup once. That can be an indication of, potentially a thinner lining. So just for information's sake, because I was curious, I'm like, well, I don't think it could be healthy to have a period where you basically barely bleed at all. Wouldn't that indicate something about the status of your endometrial lining? And there's, IVF research, of course, because that's where the money is, where they measure, so they do an ultrasound and they actually measure the thickness of the uterine lining of these study participants. And they kind of, tried to figure out if there's a connection between the length or the width, the uterine lining, how thick it is. That's the word I'm looking for, thickness. But they were trying to find out if there's a connection between the thickness of the uterine lining and a woman's chance of conceiving. So just in what the study found was that there's basically a hard limit. If a woman's uterine lining, when they measured by ultrasound, is less than about 7 millimeters, so in their post-ovulatory phase when it's supposed to be thick and juicy, then the chances of pregnancy are basically nothing. And then, as it gets to 8 and 9 millimeters, the chances of pregnancy are still a bit higher, but you still have an increased risk of miscarriage until you hit about 10 millimeters or so, where that's kind of like the point where it's like kind of like the sweet spot, I guess you could say. And so I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, Sarah, because I didn't talk about how to improve it yet, but just to give a sense of like your uterine lining, how that relates to your period, and how the thickness of it could actually come into play in terms of your chances of conceiving, and also how that all relates to hormones. So the short answer would be, the first step to improving your endometrial lining would actually be to optimize your hormones and ensure that your body has the raw materials that it needs to produce a healthy lining.
And any other tips they can do to pelvic floor exercises or fertility massage, anything like that you typically see?
I suppose it depends on the challenge that women are seeing. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen with women with regards to their uterine health?
Yeah, they're trying to go through IVF and then their lining is low. So it is below that 7 millimeters, right? So it's, so looking at either like a castor oil packs or pelvic floor or fertility massage can be helpful. But as you say, it is with functional medicine too. It's like taking it back to the basics, right? And not like attacking the uterine lining. Well, let's look at the whole system. And if your period, as you say, is the flow is low, why is that? And kind of take it deeper.
Well, to kind of put out, because it's hard to say what it is, but to kind of think about it, if you think about it in terms of hormones, it would be helpful for the woman to be fully evaluated for thyroid function to make sure that's optimal. For instance, if her thyroid function or if her thyroid is under functioning, then that means that she's much more likely to have a lower hormone level. And again, if the uterine lining is a result of the estrogen proliferation and the progesterone in both phases of the cycle, if the uterine lining is really, really thin, we got to look at what's going on with her hormones. Why are her hormones so low? And another question that we could be asking is why aren't her cells responding to those hormones? So for instance, there are certain fertility drugs that work, so they make you ovulate by making your cells desensitizing your cells to estrogen. And then, that makes your body make more and more estrogen so that you ovulate. But then if your cells are not sensitive to estrogen, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it could even be related in some cases to the types of fertility drugs that have been taken. So for example, Clomid specifically, which I'm not sure if it's being used as frequently now, but Clomid specifically is actually associated with a decrease in the thickness of the uterine lining, specifically because of the effect that it has on the estrogen receptors. And also it's associated with a reduction in cervical mucus production. So there's many reasons why this could be happening. On a basic lifestyle kind of level, you could start by making sure you're getting enough healthy fats, making sure that you're incorporating some animal fats, because of course animal fats contain cholesterol, and cholesterol is the precursor to your steroid hormones. So, those are kind of the first steps. Of course, you can always do, castor oil packs, and consider if there's actually issues going on with the uterus, consider doing some uterine massage or uterine, for example, Arvigo therapy or other types of uterine massage modalities. But ultimately, if the you can kind of tell where I'm going with this, Sarah.
Yeah.
If the root of it is the hormones, then, definitely, going to help and improve, build circulation. But we do want to have her fully evaluated to make sure it's not something else related to her hormones.
Mm-hmm. Dig deeper. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. In our last podcast, episode 20, we did dig into cervical mucus. So maybe just touch on that briefly and anything that you can recommend there for us.
Yes. Well, I mean, in terms of like when you're trying to conceive, cervical mucus is essential for natural conception. And so basically, I mean, we produce cervical mucus as we approach ovulation. And we produce cervical mucus in response to our estrogen levels rising. And many women may have noticed it, although may not know what it was. But if you've ever had that, if you've ever noticed clear, stretchy, discharge, quote unquote, is the word that doctors use to describe it, right? But if you've ever noticed that clear, stretchy, kind of looks like raw egg whites, or you may have noticed kind of like a lotiony, so it looks like creamy white hand lotion or something like that. Yeah, that is your cervical mucus. Many women have gone to the doctor thinking they have an infection when really it's just their natural mucus. And, it's interesting because we learn about our periods, but we don't learn about our mucus. Yep. So, I mean, the most important thing to know if you're trying to conceive is that your mucus is what keeps sperm alive for up to 5 days. Your mucus rapidly transports sperm into your cervical crypts and kind of transports them into your uterus and your fallopian tubes for fertilization to happen. So when you have cervical mucus, like when you see it, when you're, go to the bathroom and it's super slippery, when you're wiping and you've got all this clear, stretchy stuff coming out of you, that is when you want to have the sex. That is the best time. And so not day 14, because, women, don't ovulate on day 14 all the time. That's really important. The menstrual cycle isn't always 28 days. And even if your cycles are fairly regular, ovulation does shift. It's typically not the same day every cycle. And you don't want to wait for ovulation day anyways. You want to make sure that you have, that you're trying on those days of mucus, because it's really the mucus that is what's going to transport the sperm to where it needs to go. So, that's, I suppose, like the brief cervical mucus 101.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely check out episode 20 because we dig into it further there. I meant to ask you this, a lubricant. Do you have a lubricant that you recommend?
Well, I think so. Kind of being difficult, but I would say that, I mean, if you're trying to conceive, the first thing is to, like, if you require a lubricant, try to find a sperm friendly lubricant. So I'm thinking of brands, I think like Aloe Cadabra has a brand. There's different, lubricants, like I think Pre-Seed, but I would look at the ingredients because some of them still contain some questionable ingredients. Mm. So if you're going to look for, first of all, if you need lubricant, you look for a sperm friendly lubricant, and then look for something that doesn't contain chemicals. What I'll say about that is that, many women are kind of looking for that, like, oh, I don't have a lot of cervical mucus, so I'm going to go and buy lubrication that's going to act like cervical mucus. What these sperm-friendly lubricants essentially are is that they're the correct pH. So your vagina is naturally acidic, and sperm can't survive in an acidic environment. Acid kills them. So outside of that small window of time when your cervical mucus is flowing, your vagina is like a death trap for sperm. They just go in there and die, and they have nowhere to go because outside of your fertile window, they just can't survive, and they can't go through your cervix and all of that. So these types of sperm-friendly lubricants, they're just the correct pH, so basically they don't kill the sperm. But cervical mucus has a lot of properties that it's just impossible. It's impossible for us to, at this stage of our development as humans, we don't have the capacity to make lubricant that does what cervical mucus does. So cervical mucus has these channels, and they rapidly transport sperm where they need to go. And your cervical mucus actually filter out defective sperm. So the majority of sperm that men produce are useless. I say that with love. The majority of sperm that men produce are abnormal. That sounds better. But basically like poor morphology, poor motility, things like that. And so we have a built-in filtration system in our cervical mucus that catches all of the malformed abnormal sperm and prevents them from getting an opportunity to filter the egg. So yes, sperm-friendly lubricants certainly can help because they just, they don't kill the sperm, so that's good, but they don't do the same thing. So don't, I just want to kind of, there's a kind of like that myth out there that like, if I don't have a lot of mucus, I could just use the lube and it's going to do the same thing. So it's helpful, but it's not doing the same thing.
Getting to the root cause again as to why your cervical mucus is low, and then hydrating and getting your proper nutrients and diet and all of that is key. Yeah. Okay. So let's dig into sperm health here and some tips that we can have. We have low sperm count. What are some things
Well,
we can
I'm so glad you asked that, Sarah.
do?
We were talking a little bit before the call, and I mean, I'm sure that you experience this challenge as well. When I'm working with a woman and we're really, she's doing everything. She's doing backflips and handstands and all of the things. She's cut out all the food that she loves. She's eating this perfect diet. And many women don't really seriously consider, like actually seriously consider that, there could be an issue with her partner's sperm. And it's a really big problem because, I mean, so this is beyond, it's kind of like this is bigger than the both of us. In the research for the past 60, 70 years, there's a very clear downward trend in sperm quality, all parameters, so it's specific and measurable. So just to put that into perspective, the average 1940s man had about 113 million sperm per milliliter in terms of his concentration. And I mean, the average man today probably has closer to like 50 million.
Yeah.
And that's less than half. And so, of course, you still have men that have really high and low, but overall, there's a general trend. So I think to kind of start into this discussion, if you're trying to conceive and it's not happening, it's kind of like run, don't walk, get them tested. It's a fairly straightforward test, and you'd be so surprised. I mean, Sarah, we talked about that as well. I mean, I'm quite surprised, but I've seen a lot of really low, poor morphology sperm analyses. I've seen, and that's pretty common.
Check out episode 45 with Dr. Tom O'Brien, and we talk about the importance of removing gluten for both partners, because women typically come to see me and that they've done the elimination diet and they're making the changes, and then he's talking about studies actually where removing gluten and obviously going organic and non-GMO, because we're again in the middle of that huge food experiment that is impacting male fertility. And if you want to be too hardcore, the extinction of the human race, because if we were at 1940, it was 113, and now in 2018, it's 50 million. Yeah, that's going the wrong direction, right? So to be able to make those shifts, and even though you may just be told it's female factor infertility, the man can still, or the partner can still optimize their health by making some of these dietary and lifestyle shifts, which are huge.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I like to kind of talk about, so, the World Health Organization in 2010, they released a report where they actually detail what is normal, right? So they have this kind of low bar. So it's like, if you're below this, it's a problem, but if you're above it, it's totally fine. And so, that low bar is a concentration of 15 million sperm per milliliter, 40% motility, and 4% morphology. And just to be clear, 4% morphology means that 4 out of every 100 sperm are normal, and 96 are abnormal. And meaning like 2 heads, no head, no tail, 2 tails. And what the research shows is that, so, every couple so your average healthy couple has about a 25% chance of conceiving per cycle. And so, this one study actually compared, at what point did your percent chance of conception kind of go down, basically, to try to identify optimal. So just because that has been set as a lower bar, meaning that below that you're basically subfertile, doesn't mean that like 16 million means that you're totally good. So it's a separate question of what is optimal. And so what there was a study that was released in the New England Journal of Medicine, and what they identified as optimal was a minimum concentration of 48 million sperm per milliliter, 63% normal motility, and a greater than 12% normal morphology. I'd like to say those numbers because for any of the women listening who have actually had their partners tested and have been told that it's all normal and all good, I would really encourage you to pull it out and look at it and compare it. Mm-hmm. So let's get into some of the things that you can do, right? So what's neat is that there are a lot of lifestyle factors that affect sperm quality, and some of them are fairly straightforward. So similar to, all the things that you're doing as a woman to improve your fertility, he can basically do the same thing, right? Like men and women are complementary. When we were in utero, we were all women at one point, and then our various organs kind of changed based on our XY, XX chromosomes. So I say that because it's like, if you think about what is going to be good for your egg quality, your fertility, your menstrual cycle, it's the same nutrients and the same stuff that is essential for his fertility as well. And so following a preconception diet, many women have made a lot of changes to their diet, as you mentioned, all the different things you can do. He can do the same things. So going to some of the practical things, keeping the boys cool. So the testicles hang outside the body for a reason. And that's because they need to be a degree or two cooler than the rest of the body in order to produce sperm optimally. So as much a temperature increase of as much as 1 degree, 2 degrees can really impair sperm quality. So just take a look at that. There's always the stereotypical example of hot tubbing, but what are some of the other things? Is your partner, does he cycle a lot? Is he on a bike for 5 hours a day, and is he hotboxing the balls? Like, is he a truck driver? Is he sitting down for 6 hours a day? And just kind of thinking about those things. So similar to what I was saying with egg quality, smoking, whether it's cigarettes or marijuana. So marijuana has just been legalized here in Canada. But yes, the research shows, smoking, either, marijuana or cigarettes, does lower sperm parameters. So even more than, once per week with regards to marijuana smoking, lowered sperm concentration in one study by 29%. So yeah, significant thing.
Significant, yeah.
Yeah. Similarly, alcohol, I think we all would appreciate that it doesn't help. But just know that the studies confirm that it does reduce all parameters, count, mobility, and morphology. Soy consumption is an interesting one. Soy is clearly not like a chemical estrogen. It's a natural plant estrogen, but soy consumption has also been shown in men to increase chromosomal abnormalities in sperm and decrease sperm parameters. And then similar, like xenoestrogen exposure, we kind of know that all of the chemicals we put into the world are feminizing the fish. So you have all these male fish producing eggs. And so, is it feminizing the men? Is it reducing testosterone levels? Like, what happens when you put a whole bunch of chemicals that mimic estrogen into a man's bloodstream, right? Like, again, with the experiment, we don't want to find out. No. So let's try to minimize the exposure. And exercise is an interesting thing because, of course, regular exercise is helpful for overall health and improving sperm parameters, but there's a point at which it's no longer helpful. So if your partner is like a super, exercise junkie and working out like 2 hours a day, 5 days a week or something like that, that has also been shown to decrease. So not to say exercise is good, but too much exercise can decrease the parameters.
Vigorous, yeah.
Yeah. And a couple specific nutrients. We already talked about a lot of these, right? Because as I mentioned, it's all kind of complementary. But vitamin A is essential for normal sperm development, so retinol. And again, with the animal studies, if you want to make a male rat sterile, you deprive it of vitamin A. So researchers have done this. They've given, male rats a diet that contains no preformed vitamin A, and the rats stop producing sperm. And when they put it back, they produce sperm again. It's like a switch. So just making sure that you're getting some sources of that in your diet. Folate and zinc has been shown to improve sperm concentration, sperm morphology, and over a period of time. And if you do a test and you find your partner has low sperm parameters, even though men produce sperm every day, the process of spermatogenesis, so the whole kind of complete process of sperm, to actual sperm kind of ejaculating out. Basically, if your partner was to ejaculate today, that sperm started developing about 74 days ago, so about 3 months ago. And that's why it's important to kind of address these issues right off the bat. Because if your partner, let's say you and your partner are trying to conceive and you thought it was, all you, and then eventually, 2 years down the road or 6 months down the road, you decide to get the sperm test, you still have to wait another 3 to 6 months if you want to improve those parameters naturally. So just kind of something to think about. With all of these things I'm talking about, you wouldn't necessarily see that improvement until at least 3 to 6 months later. Mm-hmm. So coenzyme Q10, there's a lot of really compelling research about it showing that, men who are taking coenzyme Q10 for extended periods of time had significant increases in their sperm concentration, so the amount of sperm, the morphology. One study showed that after a 12-month period of men taking coenzyme Q10 twice a day, there was a 46% increase in morphology, right? Like meaning that it increased by nearly 50%, similar with sperm concentration. So having more sperm and better sperm, basically. And, there's a few others like vitamin C, because vitamin C is an antioxidant, so kind of reducing that oxidative stress. Omega-3, again, essential for normal sperm health and concentration, similar as it is for egg quality. Vitamin D, no surprise that vitamin D has also been shown to improve. And men who do have poor morphology, poor sperm parameters are more likely to have a deficiency in vitamin D. So I think I can kind of leave it there. That's a lot of information, but it's really interesting, isn't it, Sarah, just to think of all the different things that you can actually do to make your sperm better.
It's empowering because there's things that you can do, to improve. Okay, and then also with the fertility awareness method, if the sperm quality is low, how is how does that method help, and the sort of the timing side of things?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a few specific things you can do. So whether you find out that your partner has a lower concentration, meaning he has fewer actual sperm or lower count, or whether you find out that the morphology is low, so meaning he has fewer normal ones to work with. Part of how fertility awareness helps with that is, first of all, the timing. So, especially if you know that the count and quality is low, then the timing becomes even more important. You kind of want to try to get that as close as possible. And so again, it really centers on cervical mucus. And, I know many of the women listening have also used ovulation predictor kits. So there's a way to kind of use those in conjunction with fertility awareness. And so the thing about the ovulation predictor kits is that they measure for the luteinizing hormone surge, which typically happens like 24 to 36 hours before. But it doesn't confirm ovulation has happened, and it's possible to have more than one surge. So really getting a sense of like charting your cycle, getting a sense of when in your cycle you're seeing cervical mucus, kind of checking for mucus every day, that type of thing. And whenever you see that clear, stretchy cervical mucus as you approach ovulation, you want to try to time sex based on that. There's a few specific things you can do if you know that your partner has lower sperm parameters. One of the things to keep in mind is that, for instance, like if you get your partner's sperm tested, he had to, like, the instructions from the physician are going to be for him to hold off on ejaculation for several days before he does the test, right? And so what you're getting is like a best case scenario. So if it's low, it means it was low after him waiting 4 days or something like that. And so one of the ways just to kind of boost, so although men are making sperm every day, it is helpful to a point to allow a couple days for that to build up. So there is a point of diminishing returns. You don't want to go more than 6 or 7 days. Men do need to kind of ejaculate frequently to kind of get the, fresh sperm flowing. But at the same time, holding off for, say, like 4 to 5 days can help to at least boost those numbers. And so when you start charting your cycle and you have a sense of when, how many days of mucus that you have before ovulation and what it typically looks like, what are those signs that you're going into your fertile window, one of the things that you can do is actually, kind of plan it, right? Like you can't plan it to the day because ovulation isn't always the same day. And again, you're not going for ovulation, you're trying to go for the days that you see mucus. But you could certainly have your partner hold off on ejaculation for a couple of days until you start to see your cervical mucus. And then when you start having sex and start trying, then you know that you've kind of had that opportunity to build up the sperm. And then depending on how long your fertile window is, so depending on how many days that you're observing your cervical mucus, you can also opt to, say, have sex every other day. Now, I know some women, especially as we get into our late 30s and early 40s, some women don't have as many days of mucus anymore. So if you only have, say, 3 days where you're actually seeing cervical mucus as you approach ovulation, the every other day method may not work for you, right? If you only have 3 days to work with. So those are basically two strategies that you can really try to at least allow the sperm concentration to build up a little bit as you approach ovulation.
And is there anything around position for that as far as helping the sperm?
Well, see, that's a great question because position doesn't matter. I
know I've read that a lot and heard that a lot, and then I was just reading something saying actually that not to stand up, and that would be better because it's harder for the sperm to get to the cervix. And I thought, well, maybe.
Well, this is the way I describe it to my clients. So imagine like a 20-year-old, and that was her birth control.
Oh, yeah.
That's not birth control.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a healthy woman, a healthy man, you've got healthy mucus, and you've got like tons of awesome sperm, then what's going to happen is your cervical mucus is going to draw the sperm up into your cervical crypts. There's going to be tons and tons, like millions upon millions of normal sperm that are going to get through your mucus and going to fertilize the egg. So standing up or not standing up isn't the thing that's standing between you and pregnancy. I feel that, there's a lot of, like, when you think about it, like, oh, I need to lay down, I need to put my feet up, and I need to lay there for, 6 hours. That kind of is perpetuating a myth that this fertility thing is super simple. And really the only thing that's wrong is how long you're laying on your back. Mm-hmm. So if you're having sex on your fertile days and, your partner is ejaculating inside of your body, right? Like the sperm is having access and you're not conceiving, it's more than that. And I think that's an important message to get out. The position isn't going to be what is what gets you pregnant. And that's why it's so important to test the sperm, to find out, if only 2% of his sperm are normal. Because if only 2% of his sperm are normal, that's subfertile. He is essentially shooting blanks. You can't get pregnant. And so before you lay on your back and think that's the solution, we really have to look at the actual thing that's causing it. And so if he has a legitimate issue with sperm, count and quality, which would then make it more difficult to conceive, looking at ways to improve that. And also just, kind of recognizing that it's whether or not you lay on your back or whether or not you have sex, like really, the only thing you do is get an apparatus in your bedroom that hangs you upside down, and after sex, you just lay there, right? Even if you try to lay on your back, the semen kind of falls out of your vagina. So it's not even an effective way of addressing that problem.
Yeah, thanks for addressing that question, because I know I get the question all the time, and I'm sure you hear it too. So it is important to look at that myth. Okay, and so you have got a free chapter of your book. So the 5th vital sign, master your cycles and optimize your fertility. So it's available on January the 21st, and they can go to the 5thvitalsignbook.com and get a free chapter of your book. Can you share a little bit briefly about what they'd get there?
Yeah, so thank you so much for mentioning that. Yeah, so basically, if you are interested in what we were talking about today, I have an entire chapter on preparing for pregnancy that goes through a lot of what we talked about today and more in terms of optimizing egg quality, sperm quality, and that's kind of just the tip of the iceberg. Also what we talked about in terms of timing and the hormones and all the things that are involved in just understanding what's happening in your menstrual cycle so that you can really optimize your chances of getting pregnant in a real meaningful way, right? Like addressing what's actually happening behind the scenes as opposed to, for instance, laying on your back with your feet up. Mm-hmm. So, if you head over to the 5thvitalsignbook.com, then you can certainly, the first chapter is all about why the menstrual cycle is important for overall health. So you'll definitely get a good sense of what's happening. And if you're, the book is available on Amazon and other online retailers, so you can certainly, jump right in and grab a copy.
Awesome. So we'll have the link in the show notes. And thanks for coming back on the podcast, really getting into the research. I love it. And sharing all the tips to help for egg health and for sperm health. So thanks again. Thank you for listening to Get Pregnant Naturally. Seriously, it means the world to me that you're here. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can be notified of upcoming episodes. I'm excited to offer you a special gift. If you're a U.S. resident, text FERTILE to 345-345. You'll be prompted to enter your email address and you'll receive our Fertility Yoga download. In this 20-minute intro video, we focus on a calming and peaceful practice to connect back to your heart. These simple fertility yoga poses can help quiet negative thoughts and make you feel more in control. Download it now and get started today. So for U.S. residents, text FERTILE, FERTILE, to 345-345. For non-US residents, go to www.yogafreebie.com to access your special gift. That's www.yogafreebie.com to access the free fertility yoga download. And I love this quote by Dr. Mark Hyman. medical director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, and chairman of the Institute for Functional Medicine. Functional medicine is medicine by cause, not by symptom. Functional medicine practitioners don't in fact treat disease. We treat your body's ecosystem. We get rid of the bad stuff, put in the good stuff, and because your body is an intelligent system, it does the rest. Thanks for listening. Until next time.